Ecstasy. It's an illegal Class A drug, and it is incredibly controversial. But what does ecstasy actually do to the brain? Tonight, no politics, no propaganda, just the unvarnished scientific truth. We show you what happens when a group of volunteers is given 83 milligrams of specially prepared ecstasy. Good evening. 2 years ago, Channel 4 embarked on one of its boldest projects ever to conduct a groundbreaking scientific trial on the banned Class A drug, ecstasy. Tonight, the results live, and you can join the debate online right now. Over 500,000 people in Britain use ecstasy every year, but incredibly, no one knows exactly how it works in the brain, nor how harmful it could be, nor do we know whether it could actually assist, as some experts think, in the treatment of serious illnesses like depression and post-traumatic stress. In charge of this unprecedented trial, and with us here tonight, Professor of Psychopharmacology at University College London, Val Curran, and Professor of Psychiatry, David Nutt, of the Faculty of Medicine at Imperial College, two of the world's leading experts on MDMA, the chemical name for ecstasy. Well, now, Professor Nutt was the last government's top advisor on the misuse of drugs until famously fired by the then Home Secretary in a dispute over drug classification. But welcome to you both. Now, here we have our giant brain, and that is going to help us understand some of the major discoveries that the scientists have made about how ecstasy really works. Altogether, 25 people took part in the trial. They weren't breaking the law. This was an officially licensed and ethically proved trial. With us are 5 of the volunteers who agreed to be filmed going through it, an ordained priest, author, ex-SAS war veteran, and a former member of Parliament, as well as the deputy editor of New Scientist. Well, we'll be seeing what happened to you shortly. But first, at London's Hammersmith Hospital, at 6:30 tonight, the final volunteer went into the trial. He's coming out of it right now. So over to my colleague, Dr. Christian Jessen. Christian.
Thanks, John. Yes, I'm here with Ton Hume, who's just finished his part in the trial. He's gone through 90 minutes of fMRI scanning and extensive questioning. And the question we want to know, Tom, is do you think you're on MDMA or not?
Yeah, I think I'm on MDMA.
You do? You're pretty sure? And why do you think that? Tell us.
Just because of the feelings I was getting in the scanner, the feelings of euphoria and just general well-being and peacefulness, and eyes like dinner plates. 90 minutes in a scanner, to be honest, would put a lot of people off, I think. Did it seem like that to you? No, not at all. I mean, you have to remember it's a very kind of small chamber, but actually it felt like about 20-30 minutes tops.
So it seems a lot quicker. And now, are you feeling all right?
I'm feeling lovely now, yeah, fine.
Excellent, good. That's what we want to make sure of, because I'm going to escort you back to the studio.
Yeah.
And John, we'll see you back there in a few minutes' time.
Christian, we're looking forward to it very much. Now, there has been huge speculation and interest about this trial. So, what is actually involved?
Our intrepid trial volunteers come to Imperial College's Hospital Test Centre twice, a week apart. Each time they're given a capsule to swallow. But they don't know if they're being given a placebo, vitamin C, or the real thing, 83 milligrams of the purest MDMA. Nor do the scientists.
It better be real.
It's a double-blind trial, vital for the accuracy of the research.
Welcome to the pleasure dome.
Half an hour after taking the capsule, they're led to one of the most advanced fMRI scanners in the country. It'll penetrate deep inside their brains.
Keep your head nice and still.
And they don't just lie there. While they're being scanned, they're asked personal questions and to recollect the best and the worst times of their lives. The aim? To see how ecstasy affects the way their brains think. Out of the scanner after 90 minutes, and if they're on MDMA, the drug will be at peak effect. An opportunity to ask them about the quality of the experience, to describe what it's like to be on ecstasy.
How was it with the different memories?
If you could be with anyone, who would you want to be with right now?
So there's an emotional, kind of loosens you up emotionally.
Finally, the scientists want to study the psychological effects. Does MDMA change how we relate to other people? Are we more generous, more trusting? All done while high on the drug.
Maybe they put something in the crisps.
All in all, it's the most comprehensive study of ecstasy ever undertaken.
Professor Curran, it's your trial and you've waited years for this moment. Why is it so important?
Well, no one has ever done a study like this, and even though ecstasy's been around for more than 30 years, we still don't really understand what impact the drug has on the human brain. So this study was a marvellous opportunity to study how the drug acts on the brain to produce some unique psychological effects.
Well, Professor Nutt, you're the other leader in this trial. You famously said horse riding was more dangerous than ecstasy. Got sacked for it, really, effectively. Are you pro-drugs?
No, I'm not pro-drugs. I'm pro-science, though, and this is a fantastic scientific opportunity. So we can show the science of ecstasy to the world, and we can also do the first proper definitive study on how it works in the brain. And I'm extremely grateful to Channel 4 for supporting this work, because it's been very difficult to get funding for it from other sources.
Well, now, our 25 volunteers came from all sorts of backgrounds. Hayley, what do you do?
I'm an ordained priest.
Goodness, ordained priest. Was that rather a difficult decision?
It was a difficult decision, but considering the amount of people I've worked with who are homeless or addicted to drugs or alcoholics, and it's the result of unresolved trauma that clearly talking therapies haven't been able to resolve, I thought it was really important to take part.
Well, we'll be seeing this very soon because we're just about to watch what happened to you, Hayley, on the trial.
Taking a drug is always a cause of anxiety because it's going to have an impact on you. You don't know what that impact will be. But obviously, this isn't a medical situation and, you know, it's being tested formally. I'm nervous, but as a priest and also as a Christian, just thinking about the potential benefits of it in the long term, actually, which is why I'm taking part.
We haven't done a drug rating yet, but her heart rate's quite elevated.
You can also see that the pupils are dilated, which is definitely having a strong effect.
We are now getting ready for the first task. Questions will appear on the screen. Hayley, if you could open your eyes again. We've got a rating coming up. What? Is everything okay?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Are you ready?
You lift your feet up, and then it will be easier to...
You're right.
That was a placebo, that's some placebo.
I think we're all pretty certain you were on the drug today.
Yeah.
How was that for you, Eddie?
Wild.
Yeah, sit down.
Thanks.
Still feeling the effects quite strong?
Yeah.
Should we get you a bottle of water or something?
Yeah, water would be lovely.
Yeah, sure. Do that. So it's quite strange in there for you?
Yeah, especially first of all, because when it like hits you, I had a memory of dancing. You know, you can feel your heart racing. It feels like your body's melting.
Yeah.
But then later on, when it's not so intense.
Thanks, man.
Yeah. it's not so bad then.
Yeah.
Plus you get loads of happy memories back.
Yeah, and they came back spontaneously.
Yeah. I think you were like doing some scans at the beginning, and you told me to close my eyes.
Yeah.
But the feeling of happiness I was getting, all the times in my life that I've had those happy feelings were coming back. So it brought all those happy memories back.
Yeah, and that's nice.
Sorry, I just feel really happy.
You really don't have to
like
apologise.
joy.
And did it have a spiritual context?
Well, now actually it's quite interesting because despite feeling this euphoria, I feel very disconnected from God. So normally I can like pray anywhere, anytime. So of course when I felt anxious, I prayed and I felt really disconnected. When I came out of the scanner, and I was like, I can't remember you being that smartly dressed. And I was thinking, oh, look at that doctor's face, it's beautiful. And it's like, you know, all these people are so wonderful. You know, and you're just seeing this, it's almost like everything that's good and wonderful about a person you see.
So there's a emotional, kind of loosens you up emotionally? Is that what it is? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I guess it probably does. I think it makes you, it changes your emotions from being watercolours to being oils.
Right.
So they're not wishy-washy, they're intense. You can't easily brush them aside.
Well, Hayley's with me now. Very strong reaction. I mean, loved up, euphoric?
After we kind of plateaued, initially I actually found it very difficult. I really wanted to press the panic button. I really wanted to be out of the scanner. I really wanted to move. I found it overwhelming. But then after it plateaued, those first few sort of rushes, as it's called, and it plateaued, then yeah, it was absolutely euphoric.
All these weeks after, because you were one of the first, I think you were trialled about 8 weeks ago.
Yes.
All these weeks on, what are your reflections now?
Well, I can remember it all very clearly, and it's quite interesting because I was still able to use my mind very strongly to override that impulse to sort of get out of the machine and get moving. So I was able to stay in control, but there is also a real sense that you have to let yourself go to that feeling of being out of control, and that once you do that, the euphoria hits you. And I really struggled for a few days afterwards as well.
Well, we'll be catching up with you again later in this programme. But exactly how and where in Hayley's brain did the MDMA cause these very powerful feelings, particularly the sense of euphoria? After the break, Professors Nutt and Curran will reveal their first major scientific discovery when they take us deep inside our brain. Welcome back to Drugs Live. A moment ago we met Hayley, our ordained priest. She talked of euphoria. I guess that's why people, well, some people here possibly, take MDMA. Anyone here in the audience take MDMA precisely for the euphoria? Yeah. Ah, yes. Ryland, why do you take it?
I took it last Friday. I've had it a few times, and it is an intense feeling of euphoria, but over everything else, it takes every ounce of anxiety out of my head, and I love it for that reason. It makes you feel completely at one with yourself.
What about you, Charlotte? What does it make you feel?
I take it just to make me really talkative, happy, kind of over the top when I'm clubbing. It's just generally a really good, positive feeling and experience.
Aren't you talkative enough already?
Yes, probably.
Any bad experiences?
Only one bad experience when I mixed MDMA with alcohol. But I just kind of pushed drugs to the limit, and it was probably my own fault, but I was just a bit sick.
Right. Well, now, Hayley took a dose of 83 milligrams of this illegal Class A drug for this trial, but she was just one of 25 volunteers. Professor Curran, you're in charge of this study. Hayley is typical or not in terms of her reactions?
Hayley is extremely typical of the people who took part in this trial. We asked them all to say how they were feeling before they took the capsule, and then 2 hours and 4 hours after they'd taken the capsule. And as people here will know who've taken MDMA, 2 hours when the drug's peaking in the brain, you're getting pronounced jaw clenching.
That's what clubbers call gurning, isn't it?
Yeah,
correct?
okay.
Yes, right.
You're getting a loss of appetite. It's an appetite suppressant. You're getting increased thirst. So these are all classic physical effects of ecstasy. But what was particularly interesting was that even at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning when Hayley was taking the drug, so not in a club, not in a party, huge increase in subjective ratings of wanting to be close to others and feeling close to others. And then exactly as Hayley's just described, and you've just described, mammoth increases in well-being and euphoria.
Right, well now that's how you're feeling. Professor Nutt, can we go and look at what's happening physiologically? I mean, I've opened the brain, it's looking that way, that's the nose end of the brain. Tell us what's going on.
Well, shall we just start with that? This is the brain.
Right.
It comes in two hemispheres, which we've separated.
Yep.
We've colour-coded here parts of the brain responsible for movement, for feeling, and for vision. And over here, this little green area here, this is called the hypothalamus, and that's responsible for appetite, for thirst, and also for sex drives.
What about when I get drunk, for example? I mean, what happens then?
When you get drunk, alcohol dampens down the whole brain, so everything begins to become less effective. Absolutely
vision,
everything.
Mobility, the lot.
That's right, and particularly here the cerebellum, that's why you fall over when you're drunk.
OK, well, before we look at what MDMA does, let's look at Hayley's scan. Now, what are the blue bits there?
So what we've done on this scan is we've looked at the activity in the brain, and we've correlated activity in the front of the brain, the front blue blob, with the area at the back of the brain called the posterior cingulate cortex. And we've shown...
sorry, what was that?
That's this part here,
right,
the posterior
right.
cingulate cortex.
And what does that do?
Well, that's part of a circuit which is essentially the circuit that regulates the self, that generates the sense of self that people have.
So the personality is all expressed
These two
around
regions here, they intercommunicate to produce this sense that you have of what you are, what you're thinking, when you're lying still, reflecting on yourself. It's the sort of the you. This is you, the ego of you.
So Tom took that pill, and we think it was MDMA. So what happened?
So what's interesting about this circuit is that we know when people are stressed, it becomes overactive. The connectivity becomes enhanced. And in depression and maybe in traumatic stress disorder, this excessive activity leads to these perpetual ruminations about negative thoughts or about the stresses that have occurred to people.
When you've taken MDMA, what happens then?
What happens is this system begins to dampen down, and more importantly, it becomes disrupted. So it doesn't fire in synchrony, it fires asynchronously. And that's what we're seeing here, the breakdown of the firing between these two parts of the brain. And that takes away the stress and leads to this emergent feeling of euphoria and well-being.
Well, this is a major discovery.
It is, actually. This is the first time it's certainly been shown with ecstasy, one of the very few times it's been shown with any drug.
I mean, put it crudely, you close down or at least reduce the corridor of information travelling around this network between kind of, sort of, control and emotion. So emotions are flying, and is that where we get the euphoria from?
Yeah, you're reducing negative emotion.
Right.
And therefore you're allowing positive emotions to emerge. Because very many people get trapped into emotions like anxiety and depression because this circuit becomes overactive.
OK, but the one thing everybody talks about with ecstasy, serotonin.
That's right. This circuit is under quite powerful control by serotonin. And what we think is happening here is that MDMA is increasing serotonin and dampening down this circuit.
I think we've got something right here on serotonin, so let's take a quick look now.
Look inside the brain and you'd see communication networks made up of billions of cells called neurons. A dance of electricity carries signals vital for everything: thought, mood, action. But electrical impulses can't jump the gap between two neurons. That's the job of tiny chemical neurotransmitters. Serotonin is one of the most important. It's stored in sacs inside each neuron, and when an electrical impulse arrives, some of the serotonin is released from the sacs, crosses the gap, and is picked up by receptors on the next neuron in the network. And so, the signal is passed on. But MDMA disrupts this by causing a massive release of serotonin, significantly changing communication patterns within the brain.
So, we are beginning to unravel some of the mystery of what MDMA is doing in the brain. But what about the drug itself? Where did it come from? How did it get so popular? It's an interesting story.
The story of MDMA began a century ago when a German chemist discovered it. Incredibly, it wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this tree, the Marie Preux phenom tree, found only in Southeast Asia. It's the bark and the fruit that produce the key ingredient, an oil known as safrole. When that's treated with an acid and then an ordinary chemical found in household cleaning products, and no, we can't give out the exact details, the result is MDMA. It was this guy, California professor Alexander Shulgin, who in the 1970s brought MDMA to the world's attention. Known as the godfather of ecstasy, he discovered its potential after mixing it up in his lab. Then he started taking it regularly himself.
The first trial was on a train trip, and not at all uncommon, we did then have a martini or an alcohol as a prelude to dinner. And I tried the chemical in its place. And I'd find that I would blend very nicely into the disinhibition of the cocktail hour. So I looked upon it as a possible low-calorie martini.
Shulgin introduced it to therapists, and by the 1980s, the fame of the so-called love drug rapidly spread across the US, and it was totally legal. Bizarrely, Dallas, Texas was where MDMA really took off as a party drug. Originally, the drug was known as empathy, but it was soon renamed Ecstasy when people across Dallas started trying it. But on the 31st of May 1985, the US Federal Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, put an end to the party. Before too long, MDMA had been banned in most of the world, including Britain, where it became and has stayed as a Class A drug. And because it's totally illegal, it's been extraordinarily difficult to study its effects. So exactly what it does and where it works in the human brain has never been properly researched until now.
Hayley, you were quite positive about the experience, but interestingly, not everybody felt it. And Phil, you're a decorated ex-SAS man. Yep. What was your mindset as you went in?
I think I had to be open-minded about it. You know, you had to take it and say, like, put the stuff aside, don't get your knickers in a twist about it, all right, and take it for what it is. All right, this was an experiment to find out what that drug does. I don't care, you know, if people want to dump a few disco biscuits in a club, that's not what it was about. It was about finding out what this thing does to you.
But you're still a kind of military man, aren't you? I mean, you're security.
Yeah, I work the private military circuit, you know,
right.
I go away to a few nicer places in the world.
You are effectively a military man, a man with
strong
yeah. defences.
100%, yeah, 100%.
Right, well, I mean, you've been in more scary situations than an MRI scan, haven't you?
I've been in a few, yeah.
Well, shall we see what happened to you?
Yeah, let's do it. As an ex-soldier, this whole thing is geared up to helping soldiers that are having a bit of difficulty when they get home, and I'm all up for that, and I'll do anything I could to help them out.
That's fine, thanks.
If it relieves nightmares and that sort of stuff, goes without saying, I'll do what I can.
Open your eyes.
So we've seen both his heart rate go up. We've also seen one of his subjective ratings, which was relatively, wasn't high, but it was certainly above what we'd expect for placebo.
Open your eyes. Open your eyes.
It was probably stronger than I expected. and I fought against it. I don't want nothing to do with it, really, to be honest. Probably see what people get out of taking it in the club. You do get this rush coming on and this feeling of... Because I was fighting against it anyway, because I didn't want to go with it, lose control, and then started getting the hump of it.
So if you were to describe how you're feeling now, what words would you use?
I felt a bit distrustful when I came out.
Yeah, I noticed,
Do you know what I mean? I was like... I felt a bit paranoid.
Yeah. And any anxiety during the scan or beforehand?
I felt a bit... All your senses are going, all your sort of like... I don't know, it just feels like all your veins are full.
Well, I think it's interesting because MDMA is clearly not just a pure happy drug. It's not 100% every time you take it.
I wouldn't say I feel happy at all. I'm probably more serious than I was a little bit when I came out.
So, let me start the first task for you.
When I did those experiments afterwards and the test on the computer, I really had no interest whatsoever. Absolutely none. Just wanted to do your test, I'll see you later, I'm off out of it. And I just wanted to get in the car and F off. I got very distrustful in there. Basically had to keep telling myself that, you know, this is an experiment, I've signed up to this, calm down, Phil. Okay. The day after the experiment, I got up quite early. The kids are going to school and that sort of caper. And I felt absolutely appalling. I felt completely shite. It was like a hangover times 10. I didn't feel depressed, I didn't feel upset. I just felt, geez, get me out of here, like, do you know what I mean? Anyway, so I struggled with it up until about lunchtime, and then I thought, sod this, I'm off to bed. Basically, if that had happened to me and I'd have been in a nightclub and you just spiked my drink, then I'd have started fisting. You know, I'd have got pretty pissed off. And I think, you know, it would have ultimately resulted in either me having to battle my way out or, you know, it would have ended in blows.
So not everyone has a good experience, and yet same drug, same dose. Why this?
People react very differently to the same drug and the same dose. In Phil's case, it was clearly quite an unpleasant experience, and he was, I think you were saying you were fighting it, really, whereas Hayley went with the flow and had a very different kind of experience. And there's lots of reasons why people react differently. Maybe it's something to do with your military training.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, maybe because you've been taught to resist torture and the rest of it, you were trying to resist
Yeah,
this
without
drug.
going too massively into the details about military training, which I can't air here anyway, basically, you know, it's known that soldiers can be coerced by whatever method, and drugs is one of the uses, and obviously there's a mechanism inside me to combat that, and, you know, whether I deployed it on this or not, I don't know, but I certainly, it wasn't the best day out I'd ever had.
Is it possible to control your feelings? I mean, can you program the brain in that way, David?
Well, you can certainly use psychological approaches to change the way you respond to a drug. You can sort of use cognitive control, for instance. So what Phil's shown is actually quite important to us, because we're, as we'll talk about tomorrow, trying to develop this as a treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder. And if we are going to do that in soldiers who've got a different kind of background, then we may have to engage with them in a different way in order to optimise the value of the drug.
Did any of the other volunteers, Val, get anywhere near Phil's reaction?
I think Phil was very, very unusual. You were an anomaly in many ways. So if 1 out of 25, you're perhaps talking about 4% of the population who might respond in that negative way.
Now that we've got a few weeks away from your actual experience, how do you feel about it now?
I'm fine, I'm glad I did it, you know. You know, if you just take that from it and nothing else, it's proved something, isn't it? You know what I mean? You've got to put to bed what people think about the drug. You've got to go with it and say, right, this is an experiment about what it does and not what people think about it. You see what I mean? So, in a way, if something good falls out the back of this, and even if it's just to say, no, it's no good, then that's a good thing, you know what I mean?
OK, well, now we've started getting tweets, emails and Facebook questions, and from Kate. What is a dose of MDMA? What dose of MDMA are the recipients receiving in comparison to the standard amount you might get in a club?
Well, of course, that's really difficult to know, because no one actually knows what when they buy MDMA or ecstasy on the streets, they don't know exactly what they're getting. A lot of the time, they're not getting very much. And we'll show you some data from Glastonbury tomorrow. But 83 milligrams is equivalent to the traditional sort of 2 tablets.
OK. Well, one from Becky here. What are the long-term effects of ecstasy's use on the brain? Does it damage any specific part of the brain?
I think we'll be talking about that tomorrow, about serotonin and what happens there.
Well, this is just a tease. I mean...
I don't think it does. No, I think
you don't think it does?
The evidence that it damages the serotonin system is pretty speculative. So I think we can certainly, from an overall overview of the literature, it doesn't produce any enduring changes in serotonin.
There might be damage while people are taking it, if you can call it damage. But once they stop taking it, the brain recovers quite rapidly.
OK, well, we'll have a lot more of that later. Now, look, we want you to join us here in the studio tomorrow. If you've got an opinion on MDMA or the trial, come and tell us. I mean, if you think what we're doing is wrong or that we would like to hear from you, right, well, we'd like to hear you too. The details of how to take part are at channel4.com/Drugs Live. Well, now, earlier in the programme, psychiatric nurse Tom Hume was at the test centre in London where just 4.5 hours ago he thinks he was administered MDMA as part of the trial, and he and Dr. Christian have just arrived right here at our studio. Now, we'll find out exactly how he's feeling just after this break. Welcome back to Drugs Live and the results of a groundbreaking study funded by Channel 4 on how the Class A drug Ecstasy affects the brain. The professors in charge of that, of the trial, David Nutt and Val Curran, are with us right here in the studio, along with Tom Hume, who took the drug just 4 hours ago at London's Hammersmith Hospital. Dr. Christian, you and the other doctors from the Hammersmith Hospital got him here.
He's fine, aren't you?
I'm fine, yeah, I'm feeling good.
And just tell us again, you're pretty convinced it was ecstasy that you're on and not placebo?
I'm fairly convinced, yeah.
Tell us why.
Just because of the feelings that I was getting in the scanner, the feelings when I came out of the scanner, the feelings of euphoria and kind of well-being. I was, very relaxed. I'm feeling very relaxed now, which I guess I wouldn't normally, going out on live telly.
We're looking after you.
Thank you. And I think, as I said earlier, just having pupils like dinner plates is a pretty good giveaway.
It is. And I mean, you work as a psychiatric nurse, don't you?
Mm.
Was that sort of part of the reasons why you decided to take part in this trial?
It was, yeah. And I'm particularly interested, I'm also a cognitive behaviour therapist, so I'm particularly interested in how it could potentially be treated in depression. My understanding is I think it switches off the bits of the brain that drive depression, but particularly in PTSD. I mean, I do see patients with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
And we're going to very much explore that tomorrow. But what I wanted to know was this. This is a drug which is banned by every civilization in the world. I mean, there is nobody that permits it. Aren't you worried that there may be a repercussion from what you're doing?
You mean to my
physically,
own mental
mentally,
health?
everything? Yeah.
No, not really. I mean, I guess my faith, my trust is in the researchers and is in the scientists, and I guess they would never have got ethics and they would never have allowed it to happen if there was any risk to myself. So, no, I'm not particularly worried about that.
So what about two more of our volunteers who took MDMA on the trial? Lionel Shriver, the author of We Need to Talk About Kevin, and Graham Lawton, deputy editor of The New Scientist. I think it's fair to say that both of you, sitting here in the front row, had a rather vivid visual experience.
I'm often seen as someone who's very guarded and stepped back, and the word recurs stern as an adjective applied to me, which I don't recognize at all. I think that anything that helps break down barriers between people and helps people to understand each other better and to express themselves better is all to the good.
I've been so fascinated by fMRI for such a long time and always wanted to know what it would be like to do one. I just didn't expect I'd end up doing one whilst simultaneously being off my tits on ecstasy.
We're seeing an increase in her heart rate of about 10 beats per minute, so she's showing signs that she's on MDMA. Wow, yeah, pretty high.
Look at that. I don't alter my consciousness very often, and I think it's good for you once in a while, shake things up. But if I act completely different, I'm a little worried about regular me.
What kind of cues were there that made you realise that you're on MDMA, if you're convinced that you are on MDMA?
I'm pretty sure I am, yeah. Just the waves of kind of intense feeling followed by sort of calm, relaxed, euphoric feelings.
Yeah.
And then another wave of intense, kind of agitating feeling, getting very hot, as you can see. And then again, a nice relaxed. And it kind of goes, it builds up and up.
Yeah.
And then you kind of go over into a plateau, which is a very pleasant experience.
Right. And so now, in terms of your senses, do they feel changed? How do they?
Yeah, the pink door is incredibly pink.
Yeah.
I don't remember it being that pink when I came in. Yeah, a little bit psychedelic.
They all look like a bunch of creeps.
If you were to describe how you feel, you know, what words would you use?
Light.
Light.
I mean, it's pleasant.
Yeah.
There's an airiness and openness to the sensation. Slightly heightened sensory perception.
Yeah.
Which I like. The visual field is vivid, and colors are lush, which I enjoy.
Yeah. Every sense?
I can't tell about smell, because I assume you've had a shower.
The drug's often described as a love drug. You know, do you feel loved up? Would that be a fair?
You know, I'm not going to give you a cuddle, but you know, I feel pretty warmly towards you.
Yeah. So it does. It definitely brings on those positive feelings. Okay. Well, here's a nice one. If you could be with anyone, who would you want to be with right now?
My husband.
And why? So?
He'd definitely be sympathetic to my railing about how they didn't give us enough, because that's what he predicted. I wish we were together so I could at least make him feel that he was right, and that is, of course, one of the best experiences in the world.
I feel the effects a little bit. I still feel a little bit spaced out and chatty and happy, and much better than first thing on Monday morning, obviously.
With a little too much like me on a pretty good afternoon, but it wasn't as transformative as I would have enjoyed. But I can still tell there's a little buzz going on, which is fine. Long may it last.
Well, you're overwhelmingly positive about it, Lionel, but you're an ordered, concise person. You use language very carefully, lush colours. Weren't you worried about sort of being disordered by this thing?
Well, what I enjoyed about the experience is that it doesn't disorder you, and I loved being able to talk. I loved the fact that you still have the entire palette of vocabulary available to you. You can tell by the clip, you know, I was not talking, well, I was going to say I wasn't talking like an idiot. I was talking the way I always talk, so I'm stuck with it. But that's what a lot of people don't seem to understand about this drug who haven't generally taken drugs, is that it induces a sense of total self-possession. The young lady over there said it as well, that she felt like herself.
You both talked about memory. Graham, what was it that you were prompted with words, positive words, to bring back positive memories?
Unfortunately for me, the memory bit didn't work very well. The machine had been broken down that morning and hadn't been fixed properly, so I didn't get a chance to test out my positive memories to the extent that I wanted to. For me, the most noticeable thing was the psychedelic visual effects that I wasn't expecting. And I got the euphoria, and I got the empathy, and I got all those feelings. I expected those. I didn't expect that door to be throbbing in front of me. That was quite short-lived, but it was very enjoyable and very...
Well, this is interesting, Val, because although the machine seems to have broken down on Graham, certainly Lionel talked of happy memories, and indeed Hayley particularly talked of it. Why were you interested in positive thoughts?
Because we were interested in therapeutic applications, but what happened was that we asked people before they came into the trial to give us 6 positive memories and 6 negative memories, and then looked at brain activation when they were recalling the different positive and negative memories.
Shall we look at Lionel's scans and see what they tell us? Now, this is when she's on the placebo, right?
Yeah. So you can see there's some activation in the
So
visual...
now she takes MDMA, and what happens? Whoa.
You can see that there's an enormous amount more activation in the visual cortex.
So at the back of the brain here
at the back of the brain. So even though her eyes were closed, in her mind's eye, she was having much more activation, showing much more, perhaps, vivid visual stimulation.
Right. David, shall we go down and have a look at the brain again?
Absolutely.
Do you tell us physiologically what's actually happening? Because I think this is the second great breakthrough.
Yeah, this is what we think is very important. So let me just take you to this part of the brain here. This blue strip here is called the hippocampus, and is essentially the centre which regulates, integrates memories. And what we're seeing in these scans with the very positive memories is activation of large chunks of visual cortex, where the visual memories are stored. So the positivity seems to be caused by, or at least related to, this big increase in activity in those cortical areas. Now, that wasn't something we predicted. This is
so
a
that
novel
explains
finding.
this vividness.
Absolutely.
And indeed the word lush that Lionel dwelt upon.
Quite right, that's right. The increased activity in those regions, which are visual regions, explains why the memories are stronger, more positive, and more vivid.
Well, so far, apart from, of course, Phil, the experience of MDMA on the volunteers seems fairly positive. But we simply cannot ignore the dangers, even if it has been cited as a cause of death. Christian.
Yes, indeed. We've all heard about cases where, sadly, people have taken ecstasy recreationally and then died. Professor Parrott, you're a professor of psychiatry. Would you like to join us up on the sofa, please?
Right.
You have studied MDMA, and you are adamant that MDMA is a harmful drug, aren't you?
That's right.
Can you tell us why that is?
Well, basically, it's a very powerful drug, and it's very messy. It affects lots of different neurochemical systems. Serotonin, we've mentioned, it also boosts dopamine, noradrenaline, others, and all your neurohormones are boosted. What it tends to do is raise all sorts of activity in the brain, and a lot of this is unpredictable. So it's
But
a
I
drug...
thought we were talking about how alcohol really affected the whole brain and was messy, and that ecstasy was a little bit more specific. You're saying that's not the case?
MDMA is not a specific drug. It raises all sorts of material in the brain, and the effects are unpredictable, as we've seen here. Somebody felt aggressive and angry. That's not all that untypical.
But that doesn't make it dangerous. Why do you say it's actually a dangerous, a harmful drug?
Well, there's a paper in an American journal called MDMA Hug Drug or Fug Drug, and they have...
That's Fug, F-U-G.
Yeah, they have documented experiences of aggression of people who've taken MDMA. It's certainly a minority, but it can occur, as we've got the example here of somebody who felt quite angry and in danger of losing their temper. It's not typical. This is not the first study to look at therapy. There's a paper in 1986, before it was made illegal. They had 29 people. 19 of those reported euphoria, but 16 reported anxiety. And you tend to get a boosting of all sorts of emotional states, both positive and negative.
Val, I know you've got something to say. I'm going to have to let you do that after the break, though. I'm sorry. We'll see you back very shortly. Welcome back to Drugs Live. This evening we've revealed groundbreaking new research on how MDMA ecstasy works in the brain. But now we're continuing our discussion about the dangers of taking MDMA. Professor Parrott, why is MDMA dangerous? Can you make that very clear to us?
There are several reasons why it's dangerous. First, the acute effects are quite unpredictable. It also heats up the brain. It increases cortisol levels quite dramatically, and cortisol is a stress hormone. In ravers, it's increased by 800%, which is very high. So the acute effects are damaging to the brain. The recovery effects, after you take MDMA, you then have a period of 2 or 3 days where your serotonin levels are low, and then people have reports of depression, anxiety, anger, their food intake is reduced, their sleep can be impaired, etc. Thirdly, which I think we'll be talking about more tomorrow, the serotonergic neurotoxicity. But I think that's crucial here, because that explains all sorts of problems that ecstasy users describe. Memory problems, difficulties of problem solving, So people have shown that you're slow at solving problems or Sudoku problems.
We certainly will talk all of that long term tomorrow. But Val, I mean, you have to admit, ecstasy has been put down as a cause of death on death certificates, hasn't it?
Absolutely.
How can you argue with that?
I'm not arguing with that. Absolutely, it's very tragic. And there are about 20 deaths per year in the UK due to ecstasy. But to put it in context, there are 20 deaths per month due to acute alcohol intoxication, and 8,000 deaths a year.
That's because many more people drink than take ecstasy, surely.
That's part of the reason, but not many people drink to that sort of level where they're getting an acute death from acute intoxication.
So alcohol can poison you, but
Alcohol
ecstasy
poisoning
doesn't necessarily.
Well, ecstasy kills via the hypothalamus and by the lack of regulation of water intake and temperature. But you were talking about also the effects a few days later of sometimes people become a bit low mood and a bit aggressive. And you know that work as well as I do, that by day 7, all that's gone. So it's only a very, very transitory effect. I think you have to see ecstasy in comparison with other drugs and accept that a lot of people take ecstasy with lots of other drugs, especially cannabis, and what they're taking. Often you don't know in the sorts of studies Andy's talking about what is actually in the pills. Here we've been giving 83 milligrams of ecstasy. It's not had global effects on the brain, as you were saying. It's had very, very specific effects.
I mean, that's a fair point, isn't it? People do tend to mix ecstasy with all sorts of other things that they don't know what
If I can come back to the depression, the midweek depression, that's each time you take it, you suffer this period. There's a study published this month from a Canadian study which followed 3,000 school children in Canada. Those that took methamphetamine, a year later they were significantly more depressed. Another subgroup had taken MDMA, and a year later they were significantly more depressed. The levels of depression of those two subgroups are very similar. So MDMA is just as damaging as meth in terms of leading to later depression.
Well, that's very interesting. I know we've got an awful lot of comments coming in on Twitter and via email because of this discussion. John?
I'm going to pick them up in a moment, Christian, because I just want to speak to you, Glenn, as a father who lost a son to ecstasy. What's your feeling about this trial? Should it ever have been undertaken?
Well, I don't see why it shouldn't have been undertaken, because it's supposedly science. I'm a little confused.
Just hang on a little moment, because we're not hearing you as well as we might, but the help is on the way. What are your feelings about the trial?
Well, I don't see why the trial shouldn't go ahead, because the trial is trying to get to the truth of what's going on here. I have been left a little bit confused, though, because we're faced by a panel of scientists who don't agree with each other.
Well, I've got a scientist next to you. I mean, you're a psychologist, a psychopharmacologist, exactly the same trade as David Nutt. What's your feeling about this trial? What comfort can you give Glenn in terms of clarification?
Okay, I think that well-designed, well-executed scientific research that's been under ethical review is very important, particularly if ecstasy is useful as a therapeutic drug. Having said that, I think we need to make the distinction between therapeutic use of a drug and recreational use of a drug, because while it might be useful as a therapeutic, my body of research over the last 10 years has shown that ecstasy users suffer significant memory deficits, they have changes in blood oxygenation and cortisol levels.
And that is precisely what we're going to explore tomorrow night, the therapeutic aspects and the dangers of the recreational, more of that.
Yeah.
But let's find out a little bit more about how people actually take this drug in the We'll Follow. We followed 2 very different nights out.
I'm fucked, but I'm compass mentis, my mouth's dry, I'm boiling hot, I'm sweating, my jaw's going like the clappers, it's moving on its own accord. I'm chewing all the time, do you know what I mean? Yeah, apart from that, I'm happy as Larry, do you know what I mean?
Long-time raver Shabs has been taking MDMA since he was 14. He's now 38. Tonight he's with DJ pal Toby at a local event.
It gives you a lot of confidence. It makes you feel the music more. If a person who was quite shy or timid, you'd be like...
But for a growing number of young people like these 3 mates from the Midlands, taking ecstasy is not part of a big night out, it's part of a big night in.
I would say the actual come up, I don't know whether that is enjoyable. You know, I would say at the moment,
I'll have like, you get the stomach where it's almost like a level of nausea, and that's where, you know, like people that haven't used it a lot, you know, can vomit if they come up too hard, like just because of the shock to the system.
At the club, Shabs has been dancing for hours.
I've got loads of energy. I think I'll be going on until about 5, 6. But it hasn't really affected me in any way. I've got a job. I'm not a burden on society.
At the slumber party, it's a very different social experience. The guys are definitely getting the loved-up feeling.
Not only have our friendships become stronger on MDMA, and using MDMA together is always fun, we're actually literally these kind of people, like the way it's affected our lives has allowed our friendships to become enhanced.
When you take an MDMA and you really think about the relationship you've got and how incredible they all are that you have them, your conception of what love is I can't even measure how much more it is.
The attachment of that other living being, that person who's experiencing time at the exact same time you are, like, you are
so
together in that,
and
you will continue to emotionally.
Oh my God, yeah.
So good, so good. It's insane. Can't believe it.
So, Professor Curran, we've just seen that film of these chaps who are convinced that their friendship has been enhanced, heightened perhaps, by taking MDMA. Is there any sort of scientific basis for that?
Well, we were very interested in this effect of sort of social bonding, and we looked at it in the study. We gave the people a test, which is a bit like a Dragon's Den test. You see lots of faces, and you're asked to give them a certain amount of money to invest in them. And some of the faces are more trustworthy than others.
So sort of, do you like them or not, essentially?
It's do you trust them?
Do you trust them, right.
Yeah, and what we found was that when they did this task, on the first time they'd come to the hospital, so on day 1, if you'd been given MDMA...
Which is the pink.
The pink, you invested a lot more money in those faces than if you were given placebo, the blue.
And then a week later?
This is what we kind of predicted, that it would enhance trust in other people.
Yeah.
What we didn't expect was what we found a week later, which is extraordinary. So the pink on day 8 are coming back having had ecstasy a week before, but not getting any drug the second time round. They were just on placebo. But having seen those same faces before, they invested a huge amount more in them, reflecting a huge greater trust, even though they weren't on a drug the second time.
So ecstasy makes you trust people, but also that trust endures and possibly is heightened later on in time.
Absolutely, without taking another drug at all.
Which is extraordinary. Do we know why? Is there some sort of biochemical basis for that?
Well, we think the effects of ecstasy on social bonding operate through a kind of hormone that helps people bond. It helps mammals bond. So when women give birth, it's released. When women breastfeed, it's released. So we think this is the mediating effects on social bonding.
That's very interesting. John, I bet you're getting a lot of comments on that.
Yeah, and I'll be reading them out in a moment, but I just want to talk to Shabs, because we saw you bashing about on the dance floor, high on E, at 5 o'clock in the morning. I mean, don't you ever worry about the dangers?
No, not really. Like, what happens on the night. If you take it and something happens to you, then, to be honest with you, it's your fault, really.
Does something happen to you?
Well, it's never happened to me personally, but like I've seen it happen to people, like people just dying in front of me.
Dying?
Yeah, from taking too many drugs. They're so hot in the place, you just collapse, you take them outside, and then that's it, you know. So like, it's up to you as a person what you do, really. And like, I do it myself, I can only speak for myself.
Gavin, what about you're a veteran of the Manchester scene? I mean, what's your experience?
My experience is it was bringing together a whole host of people under one roof, and the friendships that we've bonded under has been very long-standing, as you rightly say.
Do you need a drug to have friendships?
No, not at all, but it's a sharing of common experience, I think, and it's bringing together people who share that common experience, and those relationships, personally speaking, are very, very long-standing. I've got friends over 20 years of age, for 20 years ago, that are still with me as friends. Only last weekend we got together from Manchester and what have you. And it's a common experience that we all share.
Helen, what about you?
Well, as a drugs counsellor, a lot of clients that I see present the need to connect and it can be a very strong need. So when they take ecstasy, they get that connection. They get a real strong connection to another, and it can be a very profound experience.
But can a friendship forged, well, Shabs, you tell me, a friendship forged on the influence of E, can it really be a sustaining friendship?
Yeah, like the gentleman said, I've had people for over 20 years I've been going out with. A lot of them stopped going out, but like, yeah, I've carried on that friendship till now. And like, we're still friends. All right, sometimes might not have seen them for a few years, but like, if I see them, do speak to them, it's like, I only saw them yesterday. So like, I don't know, like the scientific fact about it, I can only speak for myself, and like, I've got loads of friends from over 20 years ago, and I still talk to them now. So like, I don't
Charlotte, does this all ring true to you?
I don't know. I haven't really had any long-term friendships with people who I've met on Ecstasy, MDMA, but certainly you have a great time in the moment, or you know, just even if you know them for over the course of a year, you're just more alert, talkative. It's just really fun.
Because like,
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, I think the main issue is that you bond with people. A lot of it's to do with what's going on in the club at the time, but a lot of it's to do with the after-club party and what have you, and it's how you get on with people and you relate to people. Now, I haven't got 6,000 people on my Facebook site from the Hacienda from back in the day, but there's a lot of people. I may not have seen them for a long time, but they're still very, very good friends.
Right. Well, now, if you're at home and have a question or a concern or worry on any sort of drugs, whether for yourself or others, log on to the website channel4.com/drugslive for advice.
You have a strong opinion on MDMA. Do you take it? Would you like to come and talk about your experiences here live tomorrow night? Head to channel4.com/drugslive. And here's what's coming up tomorrow.
So, 2 major scientific breakthroughs and 1 more, even bigger, tomorrow night. And all that and the results of our big drug survey tomorrow at 10 on 4. But from both of us, good night.
Good night.